Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of All in All with Alex. I'm your host, of course, Alex. Today we have a very special guest, Miss Penny, and
Hello.
I'm going to let her introduce herself and give a quick background, and then we're going to get going.
Okay. So my name is Penny, and I am a trauma career coach, which is kind of a unique combination. I have complex PTSD and decided that it would be best to step away from my prior career as a business executive to focus on helping other people who have also experienced trauma, because I know how hard it can be to work with trauma. And so I've kind of taken career coaching to a different level, because I think that people with trauma struggle at work, and I want to help you stay at work.
All right, and that's very important because the world we're living in now. If you can't work, you can't survive. I mean, you gotta have
Yeah,
some kind of income
exactly.
coming in. And then the prices of everything are going up every day. So
Yeah. Well, and I think the big thing that hit me with it, Alex, is I was at a retreat last summer, and I all of a sudden felt like I was extremely privileged because I had a therapist, and a lot of the other people in the room, they were in between jobs. They were coming to the retreat because it was the only way to get access to somebody who had knowledge about trauma. And a lot of them didn't have health insurance. They were waiting to try, on a waiting list to get into a therapist. And a trauma coach is not a therapist. I definitely don't want to portray myself as something I'm not. But if there was a way to give them some support through their trauma while they waited to get into a therapist, especially if it could help them not quit their job or get fired,
right,
keep their health insurance, then it was a win-win for everybody.
right. Yeah, I definitely agree. That's pretty interesting. Um, so, um, I guess that kind of answers the first question that I had for you, actually. So we're gonna skip on to the next question. So, what?
Okay.
Well, so is that what really inspired? Like, so that story that you just told, is that what really inspired you to create the trauma responsive career guidance program?
It absolutely is. I went out on a disability leave. My mom passed away. I didn't even know I had PTSD at the time, and I went kind of circled down the drain, I guess you could say, for about a year, and decided I needed to step away from work, take a leave. And the program I put together is basically putting together everything that I did with my own therapist and with myself as I was trying to figure out, how do I move forward from all of this? And so, there's a couple of different components that are in the program, that I learned through my own treatment. And one of them, I think you see it's trendy right now online, is Ikigai. It's that Japanese philosophy about purpose. And to me, if you want to heal and get better, you got to know what your purpose is. And then the other part is, it's called the 8 dimensions of wellness, because wellness every day is going to mean something different to everybody. But yet all of those, areas of wellness overlap and intertwine and impact each other. And so as I went through that process for myself and started talking to other people about it, that's when I realized that there was definitely an opportunity to help people look at how their trauma has impacted them at work. Because if you don't have the tools and the support to reflect on it, you're not going to necessarily be able to put all the dots together, and figure out what really impacted you at work. And I know for me, I had a couple of big light bulb moments, and these elements of what I put together in the program really helped me to come to that conclusion.
Okay. So, how do you feel that trauma, particularly complex PTSD, impacts an individual's career path and professional life?
Yep. The biggest one is in the workplace, how you interact with people and what you have for expectations. And a lot of people don't understand complex PTSD versus PTSD. And both of them have a lot of stigma. So your PTSD is usually going to be based on a single event. And you can predict what's going to trigger you or is going to activate you based on it. But when you have complex PTSD, often it started younger, and it also has interpersonal difficulties. affect dysregulation, which basically means I can't control my emotions, and this negative self-concept. Even if you look like you're very confident on the inside, you're not. And so to me, when you have those kinds of situations you're in the workplace and you're dealing with people with different amounts of power and authority over you, sometimes you don't know when or how to respond to somebody that you do or do not trust. You get sucked into drama, which for people with complex trauma, people think they have to tell everybody their whole story, and you don't. I share pieces of my trauma story, but I don't share it all with people unless I've really got an established trust relationship with them. And I think that for a lot of people with trauma, they're looking for validation from others. And we spend the most of the time that we have with our coworkers. And so it's easy to overshare. And then you got stigma playing into it with people making assumptions and passing judgment and treating you differently. So if someone with trauma understands what are my patterns, what are the things about other people or situations that really activate my symptoms, and how can I kind of take some control over that, it is not going to overpower your career. I just had a session with somebody today and we were talking about boundaries, and everybody's like, oh, you've got to set your own boundaries. Yeah, you do. But in the workplace, you also got to remember other people that you're interacting with, you don't know their story. They may have boundaries. Mm-hmm. And it's not all about me and my boundaries. It's about us and how we interact together at work. Mm-hmm. So having that kind of an awareness can really help to make you more successful in the workplace. And also sometimes to help you determine what should I do for a career? Because, I'll tell you, my first job, I loved it. I was a respiratory therapist, worked in trauma rooms, had all the excitement and the energy, and I loved it. Became a mom, didn't want to work nights, weekends, and holidays. So my next career was the opposite end of the spectrum. It was in boring disability insurance. And it was great for when I was raising a family, but it comes with its own stressors. And the further I went up the career ladder, the pressure just gets more and more and more. And I had to reach a point where I was like, okay, neither one of those is healthy for me when I look at my overall wellness. Mm-hmm. And so I literally, did this analysis of what's really important to me that is going to help me feel fulfilled in what I do for work, but also feel healthy. People work themselves to death all the time and you die alone and miserable. And I didn't want to do that. I want to do something that at the end of the day, it's the end of the day. And I still feel good about what I did for the, the course of my business day, but it's not sucking up my entire life.
Gotcha. Yeah, I definitely understand that. So, how does your program help individuals explore the connection between their trauma experiences and their careers? Because we all, well, I ain't gonna say we all, but them having traumas, like how do you connect those two things? Like, let's say they have a trauma for something in their past life, but it triggers something in their career. How do you help them like separate the two, I guess you would say?
Well, and I think it's going to be a little bit different for every person. So when somebody does the program, they usually do it. We meet once a week. And I will say, this is, one dimension, work on this week. I have a list of, here's ways that it can impact you in the workplace. And then I give them a list of prompts and say, pick the ones that really resonate with you and journal about it this week and see what comes up for you. And then they don't bring me homework or anything like that. We sit down and we have a conversation and we talk about, okay, what did this make you think? How did this make you feel? Did you have any aha moments where all of a sudden things connected? Usually when people come to work with me on this, they're ready to do the assessment and really ready to dig in deep and address the problem. So it's not very often someone would come and meet with me and say, well, I really didn't uncover anything. Some of the topics, they're like, I don't think I'm going to have anything next week. Like one of the dimensions is spirituality. And people automatically think, well, I'm not religious. This isn't going to have any impact on me. But yet it really does, because, what brings you to that place where you feel you're part of a bigger universe. And for some people, it's just watching the sunrise or the sunset. It doesn't have to be religion, but how do those things, how can you weave those into your day so that you have that element of spiritual wellness even when you're going to work? You know, for me, I love the sunrise. I used to drive to work really early in the morning and watch the sunrise on my way to work. I got an early start to the day, and that was what worked well for me. Other people, it may be something completely different. But some people may look at those 8 dimensions and think, they don't all apply to me. But if you really have a good conversation and you really think about them in a meaningful way, it's easy to connect the dots on a lot of them, because life is just complex, and those 8 areas really do weave into pretty much everything that we do from a overall wellness and life perspective. Because you've got, emotional, financial, social, spiritual, occupational, physical, intellectual, and even environmental. And I think a lot of people have their vision of what does each one mean, but it means something a little different to everybody. It's kind of like that. Everybody wants work-home balance, but work-home balance isn't any one thing. It's something completely different to every single person. You know, when I had little kids, it meant one thing to me, but somebody else who was in college or retired, it meant something totally different to them. So why should I assume what something means to me that it means the same thing to other people? So I really just give, the clients that I work with prompts and ideas to start them thinking. And then we have a conversation to really talk about, how does it impact them? And people that work with me, I've had some that start and they're like, I hate what I do. I want to change jobs. And yet by the end, I had one woman, it was great. She was with me, and 6 weeks in, she's like, I used to call out once or twice a week. And I was like, whoa, you still had a job? But she told me, she's like, it's been 6 weeks and I haven't called out once. And I was like, holy cow. And she's like, the only thing that changed is the program and how we're going through and really looking at everything. Because she was going in with, these blinders on every day, thinking about it's just, I'm going to go in, I'm going to hate this. I don't like the people I'm working with. I'm doing this just for a paycheck. But when she started looking at how it impacts her whole life and how her life impacts her work, she really started to look at things differently. And now the woman has trained for her supervisor's position. She covers when the supervisor's out of the office. She's on deck for the next promotion, and she shows up to work every day and even does overtime. Okay. That's an extreme example, and it's one I'm really proud of. Yeah. Because she had, some skepticism at the beginning, but she came to me because her mom recommended it. And it was so great to see what it did for her. Mm-hmm. And then I have other people who, may come in and think, well, I think I want to change, but I don't know what I want it to be. And so we look at the purpose before. We do this 10 weeks of talking about what you do and how it impacts your work. And then we do the purpose again at the end. And all of a sudden they're like, my sense of purpose has changed a lot. What I'm looking for is different. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that's exactly what happened. I was like, I don't want to do what I was doing before. I really wanted to find something that felt better for me and made me feel like I was making an impact for other people, mm-hmm. especially when I had that moment when I felt so privileged. It didn't dawn on me that I would feel privileged simply for having health insurance. And when it did, I was just like, I have to do something different. Right. And what do I have for, what do I love to do? What are my skills? What does the world need, and what can I get paid for? Those are the 4 questions that go into that Ikigai philosophy. And, it's not I'm going to sit down in a 45-minute session and pound out what my purpose is. And it may change from week to week or year to year. But when I sat down and asked myself those questions, I'm like, I know a lot about career coaching. I know a lot about disability. And that's the other part of what I offer. I don't have a formal program on that, but I do disability coaching for people who need disability benefits and don't know how to go about getting them. Okay. And I help them to understand a very complex system. I did that for 20 years. And it was hard for me to navigate the system. I can't imagine if somebody never has had any exposure to it, how intimidating it must be. And if they tell you, no, we're going to deny your benefits, you feel like, especially if you have complex PTSD, you feel like an imposter and a fraud. Well, there must be nothing wrong with me. No, that's not what that means. And so I want to be able to help people get through those hurdles. So when I looked at my ikigai and what do I have that I can offer, career coaching and helping people through those kinds of transitions so that they can get better. And so that's really where I decided I wanted to go with my career. And it's been a pretty good experience so far.
That's good. That's good. So you actually, during that, you actually answered my next question. So we're gonna skip that one. 'Cause I was gonna ask you to share some of your success stories or transformations that you witnessed during your coaching program, but you brought those up. So, so how can individuals build resilience and develop coping strategies to manage the impact of trauma in their professional lives?
I think the first big one is to be resilient. You've got to know what's knocking you backwards. You got to understand your triggers or activation. I personally like the word activate because triggers has this like very negative image that comes up with it. And so I prefer to, think about what activates you, what makes you really on edge and feel like you need to protect yourself or run, one or the other. And I think being aware of it is the first thing. And then learning techniques and strategies that will help you to not what we call dissociate. Often the response is fight, flight, freeze, or what we call fawn, which is basically people pleasing. We just needed a fourth F to make it sound good. But those are the 4 natural reactions that people have. And not everybody does all 4. But some people just don't want to disappoint people. So all they ever do is what they think other people want them or need them to do or be. And those are the ones that are in that people pleasing mode. And for them, they got to realize what is to please other people and what's to please me. Because often you don't even know what you like anymore if you've lived your whole life trying to please other people. So doing that is going to be really helpful. People who freeze, you got to learn how to handle conflict productively or know when to walk away. Because sometimes if the other person's in fighting mode and all they want to do is fight, it's not going to have a great outcome. So you got to know, when do I walk away and how can I have a productive disagreement if I need to? Flee tends to be when people have massive anxiety attacks. Your body is literally telling you to run away. And that's part of the physical response that you're having. So no, when do I need to walk away? And even if it's just to take a break and walk around the building. I had a guy, I go to the Dunkin' Donuts drive-through all the time and he knows what I do. And this guy was asking me, he's like, I'm having a really bad day. I'm really, really anxious. I don't know what to do. And I was like, you're totally activated. I said, when you get your next break, go walk around the building 3 times. And it was cold. It was winter in Iowa. And the next time I saw him, he's like, it worked. Fresh air, moving, it fulfilled that need for him to feel like he needed to run. And he went back in, kind of reset, started again for the rest of his shift, and it was fine. So a lot of them are those simple things. Now, the hardest one I personally find to manage is fight, because I can be really nasty and I know that. And when I feel cornered, and I can get very vicious, but I have to be aware of it and literally ask myself, is what's going through my head realistic? And so there's this technique I learned. I actually had a partial hospitalization for severe anxiety years ago. And I learned this technique, and it is funny. I got to read it because I literally keep it on my desk. But I keep these little frogs everywhere because it's called a frog, and it's are your thoughts rational? Okay. And so the first question is, does my self-talk keep me alive? And if the answer to that is it's not, your first response would be, I need to stop talking to myself in my head like this and being my worst critic. Feelings, does my self-talk make me feel better? 99% of the time, the answer is absolutely not. Is my self-talk true, real, and rational? It rarely is when I'm feeling like I want to fight. Does it help me get along with others? And does it help me to reach my goals? And so for me, I carry little frogs. I have little glass frogs. I have things, and nobody would know what it is, although everybody who watches this will now because I
Right.
just shared it. But it's a little reminder. People, when I was in the office, used to think, oh, she just has a little frog on her desk. But it was there for a reason.
Right.
And it really helped me when I started to have that inner critic in my head, picking at me and constantly criticizing how I wasn't good enough and other people were so much better than me. So I like to work with my clients and teach them things like this. Simple things like keep your feet flat on the floor. If you have your feet flat on the floor and if you can take your shoes off too, in not all settings could you do that, but it helps to keep you grounded. There's different breathing techniques that you can do. I mean, let's face it, we all have to breathe, whether we're at work or not. If you're breathing and doing a breathing exercise, you're still breathing. Nobody will really even pick up on it. But focusing on how you breathe can really help you to manage when something is really setting you off in the workplace. But I think rather than just working through the moment, thinking about why is this bothering me? And that's where the reflection comes in and the journaling to really jot things down that you think about. And even if you write the same thing 4 and 5 times over again, sometimes you'll get that pattern that will click. So as an example for me, I grew up in a household where my father died. I really couldn't count on my mom for a lot of different reasons. And I had difficulty trusting adults and authority figures because of that. And at my last job, I felt betrayed by someone I trust that was my boss. And I immediately went into dissociation, started to struggle, spiraled. And when I started journaling, I'm like, wait a minute, this isn't the only time this has happened in my career. There were 2 times when I had bosses that I greatly admired and trusted. And due to organizational changes, they were moved and I didn't report to them anymore. And I spiraled. I happened to have something personal going on that was stressful. And you put it all together and it's like that perfect storm. So what did I do? I decided I absolutely have to leave and change jobs. I could not be there without reporting to that person. And so for me, I'm aware now that I have a hard time trusting authority figures. And when I do, even if it's out of our control, I overreact when I lose them. And that usually is something that's going to cause a big spiral for me. But I'm now aware of it. Of course, it doesn't hurt. I work for myself now, so I don't have to worry about losing my boss.
Right.
But if I were still in a setting like that, though, at least I have an awareness to it now so that maybe my radar will pick it up a little bit sooner and I wouldn't get to the point where I'd be like, I have to get out of this place. And I felt like I just couldn't survive there.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, okay. So what are some strategies for managing activations, should I say, or difficult emotions that may arise in the workplace? Like how you have
the AFrog is definitely a good one. Another thing that a lot of people do too is you can get all these like really cool smooth rocks. Etsy, I bought a ton of them. Keep them in your pocket, and they have like a keyword on there that makes you feel good. You can keep it in your pocket. Nobody's even going to know that you have it if you're feeling stressed. Sometimes just being able to squeeze something like that helps. Knowing what to do and what benefits you is going to be important because it's going to be something different for everybody. Like one thing I like to do is if I'm in a fight mode and I'm going to lash out verbally at somebody, I take a 90-second pause and I literally wait 90 seconds before I say anything. And by then I've kind of diffused and I'm not as explosive. And if I feel I need to say something, I've usually found a nicer way to say it, or a more productive way. Or sometimes I realize I don't want to say anything really at all anyways, and it wouldn't have been a good thing. So, also knowing who can I trust at work. Some people have a really great friend at work that's somebody that's proven they can be trusted. And sometimes it's just a matter of, pick up the phone and call them if you can't walk over to their desk, and have them kind of help you to reset what's bothering you. Because sometimes they can really help talk down that inner critic in your head that's just won't shut up. But breathing is a really big one that helps a lot of people, because when we get anxious, when we get triggered, we tend to breathe really fast. And it just doesn't serve our bodies well. So one of the things that I like to say is smell the roses, blow out the candle. If you breathe in through your nose and blow out like you're blowing out a candle, it will help you to get control of your breath, and you'll do it slower. The ultimate goal is, a lot of people do box view, are trying to take a breath in, hold it, a breath out and hold it, so that it would literally be a box if you were able to draw out how your breath was. Holding your breath on both ends is a little hard for some people. So I say it's okay to start with a rectangle. Nice, slow breath in, hold it as long as you can, blow it out as long as you can. That's the hard one to hold for me, at least. And gradually you'll get to the point where you can do it, more in that box breath, and you'll feel a little bit more control. But I mean, sometimes there are going to be triggers that you have to ask for an accommodation. So, as an example, my father died in a fire. I see smoke or hear an alarm, and I immediately go into screech mode. And so for me, a simple accommodation when I was in the office is just let me know when we're going to have a fire drill, so that at least if I don't know we're having a drill, I know it's the real thing, I will get out of the building, but I won't go into screech over a fire drill. And so that's a very simple accommodation. Sometimes people just can't deal with a lot of noise. Don't put them in a cubicle that is next to a bathroom that has a ton of traffic. Put them in a corner where it's a little bit quieter, and they're not going to have the distractions that bother them as much. So I think knowing what does activate you is going to be a key part of figuring out how do I, minimize or eliminate that in the workplace.
Okay. So, what role do you feel like therapy or counseling can play in conjunction with your program?
Oh, I love that question. That's a good one. I kind of view us as a team, as I like to put it, because I try to network a lot with therapists. I try to talk to at least 2 new people in the mental health field every week on a Zoom chat. And I like to put it this way to them: there's enough trauma to go around for all of us. We don't need to compete. We can work together and help people together. The third leg I like to see is that there's somatic experiencing, people who address what we hold in our body as far as trauma, because trauma also tends to make a lot of people physically sick. So to me, if you've got a therapist, you've got a coach, and you've got a somatic, practitioner, that's like the trifecta, as far as how we can help people. But if someone can't get a therapist, working with a coach can, bridge that gap to help them get better. And then you can still work with them, because a therapist is going to work more on the problem that happened in your past, whereas a coach works on the behaviors that you have because of that past trauma going forward. And so I kind of doing the career coaching piece, I like to look at it as, even if you could cure the trauma, if they've had it impact them career-wise, I can come in and kind of help clean up the carnage behind them, because we burn a lot of bridges when we have trauma. And part of what I do is help people. How do you get your reputation back? What are some actions that you can take to clean up people who are like, ooh, I don't want to work with that person anymore because they were really unstable before. So how do you kind of reinvent yourself? And I think having somebody who's been through those kinds of experiences can really validate what you're feeling. And that's a big part of how I work with my clients, is I like to validate what they're experiencing with anything that I can. There are a lot of traumas I can't relate to. Can I work with them on work-related stuff? Absolutely. But if somebody had a trauma that I have never experienced anything like, I may suggest they work on trauma coaching with somebody who has experienced something similar. Because I never want to portray that I've experienced a trauma like somebody if I haven't had anything remotely comparable. I think that would be insulting to them, and I would never do that. But we all talk to each other. So I'm like, oh, you have religious trauma? I have somebody I can refer you to. Or if somebody has been sexually assaulted, I know who I could refer them to. Again, got to connect with the right person and have it be that I feel a connection with them. But I can work with somebody who's had work-related trauma, who's been bullied. That's a big thing I do a lot of work with now. Who's had a death of a parent, or who, the word I like is parentified. At 9 years old, I kind of took over raising my mother because she just didn't have the capacity to care for herself, and my siblings and I took it on. So there are things that I can relate to. That's why I always, and all of my peers, we always offer a free discovery session where you literally talk to us a little bit about what happened to you without, you don't have to tell your whole story, but in a general sense, what happened and how is it impacting you today, to decide if I'm the right person to help you and if you feel comfortable with me.
Right. Okay. So, how do you feel individuals can cultivate a growth mindset and reframe their trauma experiences to turn them into sources of strength and resilience?
Yeah. Well, I hope that sharing my story will definitely do that for some people. Because, I took what were some pretty bad experiences and said, what can I do to help other people who are in a similar experience? But I've seen other people, I think of a girl that I grew up with who, she had a very abusive childhood, and she ended up becoming a counselor for young girls who have been sexually abused. Take what you are comfortable with moving forward and helping. If you're not comfortable sharing something about what you have experienced with others, that's not bad. It just means maybe you should have a job that's just a job to you. And for some people, that's absolutely fine. And I don't ever want to imply that everybody's career has to be their big purpose in life and their do all end all that they're going to be satisfied with until they retire. Because for some people, that may not be what they're looking for. And, it kind of gets back to that. What are we looking for as individuals? And then how can we do that? Some people don't want to share their trauma with anybody. And I respect that. But can I help them to deal with it inner and squash and push some of it away from the workplace? Yes. But it really is something that is so unique to every individual. I mean, I grew up with a brother and a sister. We all experienced the same things growing up together. And yet we all handled our trauma very, very differently. But what we did worked for each of us. And, my brother has passed away since, but my sister and I, we can talk about it and respect that we remember things differently. We experience things differently. And we're still there to support each other. And so I think acknowledging that what traumatized me may not traumatize other people is really important.
Right. Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. So, speaking of things like that, I mean, people, that went through traumas, they have to, I would say they would have to move around a little bit differently. So, what do you feel are some common misconceptions of people that dealt with trauma? Like some common misconceptions that people would say about those people.
Yep. Stigma is rampant. And sometimes we're only our worst nightmares as far as stigmatizing ourselves. I think one is that we're a wild card. People think of, oh my gosh, you have PTSD. You're going to explode at some point in time and be a danger to the people you work with. That is like only seen, in real life. And I mean, it's in the movies, really. It doesn't happen in real life that often. I think that people think that you can never heal from it. The memory and what your body retains may not go away, but you still can move beyond it. And I think people think, once you're unstable, that you're always going to be unstable. And I definitely don't agree with that. And that's been something that that's where that rebranding kind of comes in, helping people to clean up their reputation. And sometimes knowing, okay, you're not going to clean it up in this industry. They're a little too close knit and gossipy. But what can you do to move forward to find a new community that's not going to judge you based on past behaviors? I think that, there's a lot of victim blaming, where if somebody knows that you have trauma, they kind of almost look at you like you must have brought it on yourself, especially if the person that traumatized you is someone that they know and can't imagine that happening. And that happens a lot in workplace trauma. I mean, complex trauma is one thing, it comes from often childhood, but workplace trauma is real, especially in this day and age. I mean, people are bullied. People are traumatized by being performance managed by someone who doesn't believe in them. They're traumatized by job loss. And so I think that, having an awareness that trauma looks and feels different for everybody, and not saying just because that wouldn't be a traumatic experience for me, that it shouldn't be for you.
Right.
That's a big stigma for me that I've seen, is that people do that. There's just so many layers to it. And it's not a matter of, there's not always somebody to blame. Sometimes trauma is stuff that has really gone generation to generation, and you don't know any better. All you know is, this is what I know and how it impacts me and how I want to move forward. Some examples of that is, you have families with generational poverty. You can't blame their parent if their parent was poor and their parent was poor, for the trauma that comes from experiencing those things in life. It doesn't mean it's not traumatic, but there's not always blame to go around for something that is traumatic in life. And I think that is one of the worst stigmas of all. It's funny. I like to listen to music and think about, what are they thinking when they write the lyrics? And my daughter is really into Boy Genius right now. And they have on the record, the first song is called Without You, Without Them. And it's about learning about the generations that come before you. Because even if you never met your grandparents, your great grandparents, there are parts of them that go down and trickle into your life. And they're not always sunshine and roses. A lot of it is baggage. And to me, that's one of the worst stigmas we have, is wanting to blame somebody. We just can't do that. There are times when absolutely you can blame somebody for something that happened, but you know what? We don't know what happened to that person that made that person behave that way. And, pick up your trauma, figure out what it is, deal with whether you can accept it, whether you can forgive. But having an identity of being a victim is just not productive. And, for my family, that was the identity my mom was most comfortable with. She had a lot of reasons to feel like a victim. I absolutely would never have wanted to walk in her shoes. But I chose to not be a victim, because I saw how hard it can be to take on that persona.
So, what if, let's just say hypothetically, so let's say somebody was a victim. They did have somebody to blame for a situation. Let's just say it was their parent that traumatized them. And they've got to a point in their life to where they've forgiven them, but that person still does things to traumatize them to this day. How can somebody?
That's a really hard one. Boundaries. And sometimes those are the hardest thing to create and maintain. But boundaries are really, really important. It is extremely difficult to heal from trauma that is ongoing. And for that reason, I really would hope to see that person have access to a therapist, because I think that they're going to be the best resource to help them figure out what is the best way for them to move forward. Because being in the throes of ongoing trauma, makes recovery a lot harder. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but it is one where I think you need a team. You need a little village there to help you through it, because that's one of the hardest battles there is.
Right. Okay. I just, as you were talking, I thought about somebody that I know, and we were just having that conversation today, and I was like, let me just throw this in there while I'm thinking about it while it's on my mind. So,
Oh, I'm glad you did. Yeah.
um,
I wish I
so
had a nice, tidy answer with a bow.
yeah, I know, right? It would definitely be great, but that's part of life. We learn as we go, and everybody's situation is clearly different. How they react to each situation is different. So, um, it's just one of those
Good
things.
friends
So,
can make all the difference in situations like that. So at least your friends having the conversation with you, and
mhm,
hopefully they have a good support network,
mhm,
because it really is critical to have people you can trust.
mhm. Yep, I would definitely agree. And even if you haven't been through any drama, it's still great to have that friend network and people that you can talk to no matter what you're going through in life, because nobody ever knows where anybody's mind is at. You never know. Your friend may be contemplating suicide. It may be on their mind, and you never know, because you may not be on that type of. You might not have that relationship with them where y'all can just talk openly about anything. So you got to have those friends and those people around you that you
Mhm.
can just freely talk about anything in the world. You can just come out and
Yeah.
say it. They won't judge you or anything like that. So,
Yeah. Well, and I think you just brought up a really great point too, though, because I think it's important that we remember friendships go both ways. I know when I was really at one of my lower points, I was a very demanding friend. And, I had an incredibly close friend who was more interested in supporting me than bringing me down by sharing things about what was going on in her life. And it was very hard for me when I realized that she had been feeling suicidal. And when she
mm,
finally shared that with me, thank goodness, she didn't do anything. Um, but it made me realize that I'm not the only one that, has trauma. I'm not the only one that needs support, and that friendship really does go both ways.
mhm.
Um, and I kicked myself a lot. I wish she had shared it with me earlier, but I was so wrapped up in my own problems that I didn't even pay attention to what was going on around me. And we've worked through that, which is great. But it was very emotional for me to realize I've been that selfish.
Yeah, I mean, but see, that's part of it, because you're living your own life and you're in your reality, and you see the things that are going on that scope you and that make you feel a certain way, and so it's hard to focus on something else outside of that when it's right there in your face and you're dealing with it on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So I can definitely understand that.
Yep.
Um,
Definitely.
So, only a couple more questions before we get up out of here. I'm going to ask you, let's say, so what do you feel is maybe the most rewarding aspect of everything that you do?
Ooh. I I had a former client say to me last week, I knew Mother's Day would be hard. I sent her a little email and just said, hey, just checking in to make sure you're doing okay. And she gave me a great response back, but she said, when I start to have, rough times, I stop and think, what would Penny be saying to me right now? And I move forward with whatever I believe you'd be telling me or giving me for advice. And for me, that made me feel really good, because it validated that what I shared with her was impactful. And I don't share all the same tips with everybody. I try to do what fits that individual person. And so for me to have people think about working with me in a positive way when they're no longer even working with me tells me that I made a difference. And that feels good. It feels really good.
Mm. That's good. That's good. I mean, that's anytime you can make a difference in other people's lives for the better is definitely a great feeling. It makes you feel better about yourself and makes you feel like, hey, what I'm doing really matters. So,
Mhm.
um,
But I think what's most important for me is how it actually makes them feel. And no, it's my admin used to say to me, "Oh my God, you get so excited about giving people presents or prizes." And it's like, I feel like I'm giving them something. And
mm,
they're getting to experience the joy of knowing how to handle their trauma better. And
right,
that's what I really like, is seeing
right,
them be able to do it on their own. They may be asking themselves what I'd say to them, but they're doing it themselves. And
yeah,
that gets me really excited.
yeah, definitely, definitely, and it saves them a lot of you know, especially if you're able to help them, it saves them a lot of therapy sessions. Because they can relate more with you because you've been through trauma, and so you're speaking from experience and not more so just trying. I mean, therapy is good. I'm not saying that it's not good, but a lot of times they haven't been through trauma, so you've been through it and you've learned how to cope with it and or certain things to help you be able to live um a normal life. So I mean, it's probably easier for them to relate to you.
Yeah, I really think it is. And all of the trauma coaching programs that I've seen, all are experiential, where you literally take your own experiences and learn how to almost trauma coach yourself as you are learning to have the knowledge and skills to be a trauma coach. And I think that that piece of it does make it much more impactful for the people that you work with.
Hmm. So how do you how, so talking going back to the support group, how can individuals build a supportive network or community to aid them with healing from the trauma, or being able to at least navigate through it on a daily basis? Like, what do you feel like is the best ways for them to build that community or that support group?
Well, I think of there are a lot of different community groups that are available to help people with trauma.
Mhm.
Um, I know another coach who is actually putting together an online community, and if anybody's interested, I would definitely be comfortable pointing them in her direction. She is in North Carolina. But there are a lot of other groups that are, some of them are very specific to different types of trauma. I know, as an example, the Workplace Bullying Institute has one that's called Safe Harbor. And I'm on their list. Last month when they had, or yeah, this month when they had their May meeting, I was the guest speaker and showed up, and I was blown away by how we literally talked for 3 hours, and it was very productive conversation about experiences and how they can respond to them.
Okay.
But I think at different points in their life, people may want a community that's people that are strangers, and other times they may want a community that is people that do know them well, depending
Right.
on where they're at in their life and in their healing process. But I think that there are some great resources available. You just got to know, what is my trauma and where do I identify as a group that I'd like to talk to. Because I mean, there are some obvious ones for survivors of sexual abuse and religious abuse and things along those lines. There aren't as many for people who lost a parent when they were a young child.
Mhm. Right.
Those things are available for kids today, but they weren't when I was a kid.
Hmm.
But I think it's a matter of, talk to your healthcare provider, look up what may be in your community. If somebody gets stumped, send them my way. I'll do some research and help them find what may be available for them. The beauty of having things available online now is that you a lot of support groups are available online and are available to people worldwide. And
Hmm.
that really does help a lot too.
Right. Right. So, last question. What are you? Where's next for you in your journey?
Um, I just got the book out a couple weeks ago, so that's, I think, a big part. I'm really just looking to build my client base and to help people. I'll be very transparent. I believe I'm cheap for what I do. I There's a lot of people who charge thousands of dollars for career coaching, and I charge a visit. 10 visits, and then after that, if people stick with me, I drop it down to 50. And you don't have to meet with me every week. If you can't afford it, we can do periodic here and there, whatever works. So I just want to continue to get the program out there and help people, and, see where it goes from there. I'd love to get to the point where I have to actually train other people to do what I do. When I first pitched my idea to some leaders in the industry, that's the first thing they said is get ready to scale, because there's going to be a lot of need for it. So now I'm really just trying to get the word out there and for people to experience it and thrive afterwards and share, their journey with other people so that we can get more people on that right path from a career perspective.
Right. Yeah, I definitely would agree with that. That's definitely, and I can see, I can see you accomplishing those goals, because I mean, I can tell you're very passionate about it, and like I said, you've you've been through trauma yourself, and you're able to, maintain and still go on and live about a life or whatever. So I know all the endeavors that you want to pursue, I'm pretty sure you can accomplish those things. So.
You know what? I sure hope so. And if I don't, I have the toolkit to step back and reassess my goals.
Yeah, I mean, but you always say, shoot for the moon. And if you land them, you always give yourself a expectation that's way out of where you really want to be, and that way, if you don't quite get there, you still land somewhere close to that area. You're still above where you originally wanted to be in the first place. So,
exactly. I love that thought process.
I won't hold you much longer. I definitely appreciate all your time, and I appreciate all the information and everything that you've shared with the audience. And I hope that they, reach out to you, and reach out to you and just at least have a conversation with you. I mean, you never know how one conversation can change somebody's life. So I definitely hope they reach out to you, talk with you. I'll put all your information. I'll get you to send me all your information. I'll put everything in the description of the video and everywhere.
Perfect.
So that way they be able to contact you. And so any last words that you want to leave for them before we get up out of here?
That's great. I think, my big saying is don't let past trauma determine your future. We all have varying degrees of traumatic experiences in the past. Figure out what you can do and learn from it, and know that you keep the momentum going forward. And that's winning. That's succeeding and conquering whatever trauma happened to you. So that's really where I'd like to leave things with everybody.
Okay. Well, once again, thank you for your time, everybody. You all have just watched another episode of All In All with Alex, and we'll see you guys on the next episode.